Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint. We continue our in-depth coverage of the COVID-19 public health emergency. Tonight we hear from three top public servants. Later on we'll speak to the captain of the port, Manuel Tirado, about the measures put in place by the Port Authority to continue, where possible, business as usual. The Chief Technical Officer, Hector Montado, talks to us about the construction industry, an important revenue stream for the Gibraltar government, but one that is unavoidably impacted by this pandemic. Just how big is the cost to the Gibraltar economy, and what is the cost of the measures put in place to keep businesses ticking over and employees with money in their pockets at this difficult time? We're here at number 6 Convent Place to speak to the Financial Secretary Albert Mena, who today has started making payments to some 5,000, almost 5,000 individuals who have been successful applicants on the government's Beat COVID scheme. Financial Secretary Albert Mena, thanks a lot for your time at what is a very busy juncture in the delivery of the Beat COVID-19 payments for the Gibraltar government. Maybe you can just give us a very quick overview, start there as to where we are.
Where we are is probably the key moment. I hope to be able to be in a position by the end of today to release payments. I'm very confident that will happen. We will start seeing payments flowing to the employers and the self-employed people that have made applications. Of course, because of the way the application process works, we find that we have to download data at particular intervals and check that data. But by the end of today, I expect to have about £5 million going out to those applicants, and we're looking at about 4,500 employees and probably about 300 odd self-employed individuals.
So those are the applicants who have been successful, but you'll have rejected some of the applications?
Yes, I think in total we have about 5,100 employees that are that for which an employer has made an application. We think about 12% of those will be rejected, and we'll end up with about 4,500 employees being accepted. And on self-employed, we had about 450 self-employed applications, and we've rejected about 22%, which is about 100, ending up with about 350 self-employed individuals who receive a payment.
And obviously the ones who have been successful will receive money. Those who haven't, what can you say about why they weren't successful, and will they get some feedback?
Okay, so the way the process works is that at the moment we're uploading the data so that the payments can flow, which is the important thing that will happen above everything else, so that the employers, once they have the money in hand, they are able to pass that money over to their employees. In respect of self-employed individuals, that will go straight to their bank account, but this takes a couple of days. When we trigger all of this, and once we've approved the process, we will be sending employers an email, so they will have on that email what employees have been accepted, what employees have been rejected. But the employees themselves will also receive an email and a text message to the extent that they've provided those details in the application. So probably by tomorrow, you'll start to see emails go out to people and text messages go out to people, and people will be informed not only that whether they've been accepted or rejected, but also the amount that they will receive from their employer once it's passed on. More or less, do we know what the average payout is going to be? Yes, it varies clearly, because between self-employed and employees, the employees, the average is about £1,050, because of course in there you have part-time employees. And similarly with self-employed individuals, it's about £870. That means that some people will get more than that, some people will get less than that. The maximum, of course, is 1,155. You'll have reviewed them on a case-by-case basis. How easy or difficult has that been to manage in terms of workload? It's been a tremendous workload, because we set up a system and it sounds very simple. People make an application and we'll look at all these facets. We'll look at whether they've paid POA, they haven't paid POA, they have other income, but all that requires to be checked. Are they in the relevant sector? Are they not in the relevant sector? All of that has been checked across the board with a view of trying to make sure that people are not deprived of a payment unless clearly they are failing on one of those categories or a number of those categories. And even when we've looked at the sample and we've had, if I can use the term computer say no, and computer say, okay, these individuals are rejected, we've then looked at the rejections to see whether those categories are right and whether we've got something wrong in our analysis, or whether even the way we prepared the analysis doesn't make sense. But yes, we have an explanation for each individual and an understanding of why an individual has been rejected or accepted.
We've heard the Chief Minister use very robust language when talking about hypothetical abusers of this BEAT scheme. Can you speak to that at all? When you were rejecting applications, has it been a failure of administration, didn't fill in the form properly, or is this somebody who's trying to cheat the system?
I think, as with everything in life, there is a cross-section of that. There are people who have made genuine mistakes putting through the forms. I think there are people that are cheating the system, but by and large, people have adhered to the rules. Clearly, we also need to understand that the legislation only came out partway through the process. So there are genuine mistakes when people have made applications because the rules were not clear to them or they were not as clearly defined. We've updated, as you know, the guidance notes as we've gone along. And generally, we've tried to give people the benefit of the doubt where we think there is a benefit of the doubt. Where we think there is abuse in the system, as the Chief Minister will identify it and will root it out and will deal with it.
You've given several figures throughout the course of this interview which are provisional because you continue to process further applications.
There's another 700 odd individuals that will come into the scheme of things. Those are, as you know, we set a timetable and said anybody who put their application in before the 21st of April would receive payment by the end of the month. We're still very confident we're going to achieve that, but in order to do that and to carry out all the checks, it is not easy to do in one go. So we've been downloading data and analysing that data. And the figures I gave before for payments that are going to go out today relate to the data that was downloaded prior to the last change of relevant sector, which was last Thursday. We have since had a further about 700, 800 applications for individuals come through, and those are currently being analysed. But we're confident that database will be done probably tomorrow and we'll get the cash out tomorrow.
You've referred to the latest changes to regulations which make wholesalers who do not have a tobacco licence eligible for BEAT, those changes as from last Thursday. How does the government go about deciding who should be eligible for this compensation and who shouldn't?
Okay, so as you've seen, we've introduced a number of measures. We first introduced in March measures that apply to companies to soften the blow of the costs that they are meeting. Then we applied measures that deal with the costs of employees. And when we started off with what was a problematic sector at that point in time as we were shutting down. Then it moved to the excluded sector and to the relevant sector. All of these measures have been taken in consultation with various bodies, the CELAC group that the Chief Minister set up, which is meeting regularly. We also get feedback from businesses, and we get feedback from other bodies that talk to us, including the unions. And based on that, we try to put together a measure that will give the maximum benefit for the firepower that we're deploying. So one of the things that the Chief Minister said at the beginning is, look, we have so much firepower, we have to stagger this during an epidemic or a period that is unknown. So let's just try to measure as we go. Let's do it in a very cautious and careful way to make sure we leave enough firepower to not only deal with this period at this point in time, but to be able to deal with how long this may take and the measures we may need to introduce as we come out to reinvigorate the economy.
That must be a really difficult sort of calculation to make, because the reality is that we don't know how long this is going to last, and that must make somebody with an accounting brain like yours always trying to forecast and look ahead. I don't know if anxious is the right word, but it must be less than satisfactory to not know how this is going to pan out.
There is no rule book. we're working in the unknown. There is no rule book, and everybody's doing the same. All the other countries are doing exactly the same. We're trying our best to try to see what other countries are doing, how they brought processes in, and how they brought incentives in, and to also take as much feedback as we can from the business community and the people that we've got in the select group, as well as other people that contribute to us and provide advice and give us information to say, well, how can we best deal with this? But there is no rule book. This is we're doing this as we go along and trying our best.
In respect of the period of time that BEAT covers, there's a discrepancy between that and when the forced lockdown, if you like, of certain industries was enacted. So there'll be a period of time which is not covered by BEAT, but for which those businesses and employees were not able to do business and get compensation. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think BEAT is a relatively straightforward measure, but actually, as with everything else, it's quite a complex measure. In that, when you start to analyse things and see, well, okay, what are the conditions that have been put in? What are the general provisions that have been put into the legislation to make sure we deal with things? It is not easy to apply BEAT for a shorter period of time than a month, because we cannot be taking people in or out. We started off in mid-March with affected sectors, and at that point in time we were looking at what were affected sectors. We hadn't really thought about how we could deal with the employees. One of the things that one of the groups we consulted obviously is the opposition, and we've had discussions with them at how BEAT might work. But before we got to that position, we needed to understand the impact financially of what BEAT meant to us and how we might deploy it.
In respect of the payments that you are making as of today, have you got an idea of how they break down by nationality?
Yes, I do. It depends whether you're looking at self-employed or you're looking at the employees. But in terms of nationality, the employed individuals, it breaks down about 27% British, 59% Spanish, and 14% other nationalities. We also have this information by address, so that we can work out where they are by address.
Because some of those will be Gibraltar residents,
yes,
even though they're not British nationals, right, obviously.
And by self-employed, it's 75% British, 10% Spanish, and 15% other. Sorry.
How would you characterise your exchanges? You talked about upwards of 1,000 emails, obviously a very high number of applications. How would you characterise the exchanges with the applicants?
I think you're referring to the InfoBeat COVID email. What we have there is a different group of people that fall under my department. We're looking at all of that, but a different group of people trying to deal with the requests and trying to give a bit more colour to the guidance note that I put out there and to do with specific situations. We've dealt with, as of last night, I think we dealt with about 1,000 emails coming in, which is a tremendous amount of emails to deal with for what is a small administration, trying to deal with very specific circumstances. I think very positive. I think generally, there are, as with everything in life, there are exceptions, but generally relatively positive, and we're trying to help people with what is not an easy system. It's been introduced. We are learning as we go along, and people are asking questions and helping us learn through that process, because some of the questions do actually require a policy steer and say, well, do we include this? Don't we include this? How do we deal with this circumstance? So it has been useful as well as anything else, but it is a huge volume of emails to go through and a huge volume of issues to deal with.
Sure. I'll ask you about how the team is coping with the workload in just a moment, but we've been talking about BEAT specifically, but as a numbers man, you obviously have to have oversight of the Gibraltar government's income. A lot of those streams are now heavily impacted, and you need to make assessments about affordability in the more general sense beyond just BEAT. Do you have a flavour for how much this COVID-19 crisis, public health emergency, is going to cost the Gibraltar government?
I think there are a number of areas that I think you highlighted. We have the additional cost of whatever equipment we need to buy to make sure that our nurses and our doctors are protected and have the right equipment to save lives, which I think is what all of this is about. We then have, quite separately, the costs of of the income that government is not accruing, either because people are closed down and not able to pay, or because we've provided incentives in the form of non-payment of rates and some of the other incentives that we've provided for. We then have the cost quite separately of the Beat COVID measures, and I think there will be an additional period as we unlock where we need to look at other things and as we need to reinvigorate the economy on the way to fully unlocking. I do have an idea of all of that. I'm confident that we can meet those costs, but I won't quantify it if you don't mind.
Okay, so you referred to it there, and the Chief Minister did in recent days as well, the need for a stimulus package effectively to, as the lockdown is loosened carefully, as the Chief Minister said, that the government with the deepest pockets and with the ability to legislate assist Gibraltar to get back up on its feet to the extent that it can, as and when it can. What can you tell us about how you're approaching that stimulus package?
Well, I think we're looking at all the possibilities and what it is that we can be done, as you'd expect us to do. The interesting thing is, as I said before, there is no rule book. But equally, no country has come out of this. We've seen China, but we haven't seen any stimulus packages on the way out of the process, and we need to look carefully. If you look at the packages we've introduced, what we've done is things that have been done in other jurisdictions, but made them local and tried to give them a local flavour so that they work better for our specific needs. Clearly, we'll need to do the same with other packages. So I've looked at packages in Switzerland, I've looked at packages in all other countries. But as yet, we haven't seen any of the other countries come out and create a fiscal package for the way out. So we'll keep looking at it. We'll keep looking at articles that have been written by others out there with ideas. And we will, of course, need to adapt after consultation with the opposition, with CELAC, with all the other stakeholders that are involved to come up with something that is Gibraltar specific and suitable for Gibraltar.
You've just given a flavour there for how much is still up in the air, and also earlier on in the interview for how much has already been done in a short space of time. How would you characterise the work of the Office of the Financial Secretary at this moment in time?
Extremely overburdened. I think it is a really difficult time. I think everybody's working very positively. I don't think it's fair to just characterise my office. I think there are people across government that have gone way beyond the call of duty. And this goes from the GHA to the nurses, but also from the administration side and dealing with fiscal measures. The Office of the Commissioner of Income Tax has been tremendous and a tremendous support. The Office of the Director of Employment has been working all hours, and similarly the Treasury and under the Accountant General have been working all hours. The teams that I've had with answering emails on the Beat COVID have been tremendous, and similarly I have the people at IT that have provided the backbone to enable us to be able to get all those emails out today. And you can appreciate getting 5,500 emails out, which is more or less what we will do by the end of today, is no small feat. So very positive, I think, very positive and encouraging. People have been tremendous and a tremendous support. Stay positive, we will find our way through it. I think confident that we've got the firepower to deal with what we need to deal with. And just be positive, we'll get through it, and we'll try to get to all the responses that people have. We'll try to deal with all their issues, but I think it'll take a bit of time. We're a small administration. I think people need to bear with that as well, but we will get there.
Hector Montado, Chief Technical Officer for the Gibraltar Government, thanks a lot for speaking to us. Construction has continued throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, but only certain sites that you've granted permissions to. Can you tell us how you approached that?
I think it's important to give a perspective of what's been allowed to continue in relation to what's been applied for. The perception might be that it's business as usual, because the public sees the larger sites, some of the larger sites continuing. Just to give you some numbers, we've had close to 80 formal applications received. We've had scores of people also calling the office, asking for what the procedure was, what the criteria were.
Like informal applications.
Informal applications, and not all of them have obviously become a formal application. So out of those 80 plus, close to 80 formal applications, we've only exempted in total so far 27, and we've declined obviously the balance. Out of those 27, not all of them are still active. A lot of them expired before today. Some of them expired today and will not be renewed. And going forwards, because the period of lockdown continues until the 6th of May at the moment, there'll be about 14 that will still be active in Gibraltar. So if you look at that sort of in the context, it's not that much that has been allowed to proceed. If you go to building control and planning, they will advise you that there's about 100 odd active planning permits and building control permits. So it gives you an idea that the construction is not really carried on with business as usual.
So it's less than a fifth that has been allowed to continue, and of those projects that have been allowed to continue, we're here close to the Bassadoni Automotive Group's construction site where they're preparing a new showroom and offices. But although we can see workmen on site, the number of them is significantly reduced. There would be a lot more of them were it not for the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Yeah, absolutely correct. I think you got to put it into perspective as well that when considering exemptions, each case is considered individually. There are some which are quite sort of simple to make a decision on. I'll give you an example. If it's critical national infrastructure, we've got the new power station, which is not being constructed, but it's being commissioned. Obviously, that gets an exemption because it's critical national infrastructure. The next criteria was any project that was COVID related.
Sorry, is there still work on the new power station? I thought that was pretty much finished, but there's still little bits to do?
There's a commissioning aspect, so you need sort of people that are doing their commissioning work, so that gets given an exemption. It's not construction itself, but obviously you've got operations that can be related to that, so that was given an exemption. COVID related, as I was saying, projects like the Nightingale Hospital at Europa Point, that got an exemption certificate. The conversion works up at Mont Alvania, that got an exemption. From memory, there's about 8 that were issued which were COVID related.
Like building up resilience in the community to deal with it.
Exactly. So those were easy to consider. They still had conditions imposed on them regarding following public health advice, etc. Then you move on to sites which applied, which were more with safety in mind. An example of that is the works that were carrying on behind Jumpers buildings, which I think you carried a report on. And that showed that you had exposed slopes, and if you don't deal with that, then it could cause other problems, like you could have collapses of slopes. You've got sites which need to tie in their structures because you can't leave them as they are. Obviously, the lockdown came at the time when construction was carrying on as normal, and then it was very quick. As we all know, things have moved very quickly with COVID. So an announcement was made on 22nd of March. 23rd of March was rather hectic in having to process a lot of applications for exemptions, and 24th of March we had the lockdown. So obviously, if you leave a construction site unattended for over a month, then that could cause other problems, and I think it has to be the lesser of two evils. It's important as well to say that when looking at all the criteria that you need to look that you're considering, apart from the obvious ones I just said, like national infrastructure, COVID, safety, there are aspects like, for example, the Ministry of Defence. They need to have an exemption to carry out essential operations. Coming back to your point on the number of people on a site, it's true to say that the sites which are carrying on, the public sees activity, but the activity is much reduced. You mentioned the site that's behind us. I think there's about 20 operatives working at the moment. The site at this stage of construction, you'd expect to see over 100 if not more working. So that's generally also the case, that you see that the construction activity, that the people on site are much less than you would normally expect to see on construction projects.
GBC carried a report this week on the potential impact that COVID-19 generally will have on the construction industry, which is unavoidable if you want to, take into consideration public health, which I think the whole community has got behind. But notwithstanding, the decision to award permits or not will have pleased some people and displeased others. So you'll have had to deal with some complaints, I'm sure.
It's always difficult to balance the individual needs. It's different, for example, if you have a developer might say, if I don't carry on, it's going to affect my project, which is an obvious statement. But you also have the other aspect where you got people with small projects who are saying, I've got my bathroom needs to be finished, and I still got 5 weeks to go. So again, it's part of the balancing act that you have. I don't really need to. Something is difficult for me to consider. The economic impact. We know that COVID is obviously affecting the industry generally. It has to be the case because it's not just the activity that you see on a site. Construction generates a whole lot of other activity around it. Material suppliers, subcontracting, transport. So all that, when you add all that into the whole equation, obviously there is going to be an effect. The fact the site might still be continuing does not mean that it's not going to have an impact on that particular project, be it the contractor, the developer, or whoever the client might be. So it's always difficult. I don't really sort of look at the economic impact, because otherwise everything will have an economic impact and everything will be exempted and then will be business as usual, which has not been the case.
You're looking at the technical aspects as the Chief Technical Officer.
Exactly. I need to consider if an exemption request is made and the arguments that are put forward to justify whether an exemption should be awarded or not. No?
And to be clear, have you allowed any sort of small projects? You mentioned the bathroom. Have you allowed any of those to go ahead? Have there been sort of specifics that have merited it?
The smaller projects have been the ones that have been most difficult, because they've been you get a more the personal aspect. Somebody applies because, like I said, they might have had a bathroom that needs to be finished, but the job's going to take 4 weeks. But they're using cross-frontier workforce, and that's been one of the key aims has been to limit movement across the frontier, because otherwise, it just defeats the whole purpose of what the government is trying to do with the lockdown restrictions in general. So it's been difficult. Most of, if not all, the smaller projects have not been exempted. We've had 3 in total right at the very beginning, and it was a case, to give you an example, somebody who wanted to have 5 hours or 4 or 5 hours, but they had to finish a particular aspect which would allow them to move into their house, because at the time they were living with their over 70 parents. So it was a balance of, do you allow them to continue and finish this off so they can move out and not expose greater risk to the over 70. So that's been sort of the few that have been granted, and I said 3 have been on that basis. Other than that, they've been declined.
Okay. And in respect of those sites which remain active, there will be an element of enforcement to make sure that they are sticking to the conditions that you have put in place. How has this been carried out, and have you had any issues?
Every day a schedule is sent to the RGP and to building control, so they can enforce their respective fields. Obviously the RGP, if they see a building site that's working, then they can go up and say, check their schedule, the site's exempted, it isn't exempted, and they can then take action as necessary if they don't have a permit. And I don't know how many of these cases have arisen. They'll just go and say, well, you don't have a permit, you should stop. And I suppose if they carry on and they ignore the advice, they'll get processed or take action against them. Building control needs to do their job as well in doing their building inspections, so they've carried on with the sites. So that's the enforcement act. Like I said, every day an updated schedule is sent to the RGP through the Deputy Commissioner and to the senior building control officer as well, so they're both aware of what is and isn't supposed to be proceeding.
And there'll have been noise complaints as well, because people have spent a lot longer at home. We've heard the RGP tell us that those are significantly up as compared to before lockdown, not specifically from construction sites, just generally that noise complaints are up by virtue of people spending more time at home. Are you aware of how that issue has been dealt with from the government's perspective?
The larger sites are the ones that have generated most complaints. I think in one of the press conferences, Deputy Minister Isler as well, I think, mentioned that, for example, the project E1 on Gibraltar Road, opposite Beach Terraces, that's generated lots of complaints. And what we did was we adjusted the conditions on the permits that were issued. The permit has a condition that says we can adjust, amend, revoke at short notice. There is no sort of, we don't have to give notice. We just have the power to basically amend. So what we've done there in those instances, we've reduced allowed them not to start working at 8 o'clock in the morning as they normally would have. They start maybe at 10 or even later if needs be, and they need to finish earlier. So that's how we try to balance the need for a project to carry on for whatever reason it's been allowed to carry on for, be it safety, etc. And obviously the fact that people are at home, whereas normally you'd go to work and you wouldn't be sort of aware of the noise. When you're in lockdown, it obviously makes it more difficult. So we have tried to balance one against the other, and restrictions have been imposed on sites. It isn't business as usual. I think that's the message. It isn't business as usual because otherwise you might as well not bother doing a lockdown in construction.
Sure. So we're in uncharted territory. Things are fluid, and you are pretty much reviewing things on a case-by-case basis.
Exactly. Every application that comes in gets reviewed. I said many permits expired today because they were originally issued a month after the lockdown came in. There was an extension to the lockdown period issued on the 6th of April to the 6th of May. So the ones that are being exempted going forwards, they'll have validity until the 6th of May. And after that, we'll see what the decision is on how the lockdown, whether it continues or whether it's changed in any shape or form.
Because in discussing that, the Chief Minister this week did mention the construction industry as one that would potentially be looked at in the first phase of easing restrictions. From a technical perspective, even though final decisions haven't been made, can you give us some insight into how you anticipate dealing with that?
As you say, the government is considering the whole aspect of easing a lockdown. And this is just one of the many cogs that need to be included in that. It's difficult at the moment to decide or to say what it is that is going to happen. For example, in Spain, and we don't mirror ourselves with Spain, of course, but they've allowed construction to continue on sites which, for example, are unoccupied. So you might have a site like the one behind us where it's self-contained, and that could, for example, in Spain, that would have been exempted and they can carry on. Here, it could be a possibility. It's different to when you have to work, for example, inside an office building and doing a refurbishment there, where would you be allowing the workers to come in and be in contact with, people who are in the offices, etc. So it's not easy at the moment to see how we're going to release the lockdown. Obviously, it won't be after the 6th of May. It won't be a case of anything can carry on as usual. Like I said before, the smaller contractors are the ones that worry us a bit more because invariably they are cross-frontier. But having said that, the larger contractors would also need to be sort of taken into consideration because although the larger contractors that are working at the moment, they are using workforce from Portugal, the majority of them, which is based in Gibraltar. So it's not a case that they've been having cross-frontier movements, and they did this weeks before lockdown came into place, and that was one of the considerations. If your workforce is based in Gibraltar, does that sort of assist in us taking a decision on whether or not we want to limit movement across the frontier? If they're based here, then that's not the case. It's different to you say, well, if you give me an exemption, I'll bring my workforce in. When you're, if that sort of defeats the purpose, because you can have people who are contaminated. And they come in here and then it just defeats the purpose. No? So coming back to the question on the releasing the lockdown, not easy to see how we're going to do it in isolation. It'll have to be part of the wider plan, but obviously it will be a phased approach. When that will happen, that we'll have to see.
In short, are you satisfied that to date the government has been able to mitigate and manage the risks associated with COVID-19 within the construction industry?
Well, if you look at the activity that was there before lockdown into place, and we've been told the numbers of cross-frontier movements that are at the moment compared to what they usually are, construction is obviously a big part of that. Obviously, construction as a whole, and like I said, not just those sites, everything that goes around it generates a lot of movements in and out from Spain. If you look at that from that angle, then obviously by restricting what we're allowing to proceed, then the numbers have definitely gone down. So by that measure, you are effectively stopping another avenue of external influence on our COVID situation.